Welcome everyone. Let's call this Policy and Governance Committee meeting to order here. The first item on there is approval of the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Moving on, Appendix 6, the complaint process. This is one of the things I'm going to turn over to Joe. We brought you in today to talk about this. I know at the last meeting we did discuss a little bit about maybe there were some issues with this policy complaint process.
Well, it's a kind of a mystery to me exactly what it is. It has what I think are some fundamental flaws. The best illustrations, many of you are on board when Stephanie Van Housen was disciplined and eventually her contract not renewed. And
I was there for the hearing part.
okay. Initially, after she was suspended, the Center for Worker Justice filed an Appendix 6 complaint. Not on her behalf, just independently, and it was never clear if she actually supported or even participated in that. And the challenge in that is that there's a group of people who want to bring a complaint in favor of a specific employee and against certain administrators without access to the information. So you can't trot out the employee's personnel file at that point because the employee's not a party and it's a confidential record. And I've seen not exactly this process, but in some other districts where there are board policies which basically purport to allow people to address the board on complaints about virtually anything. And an unfortunate byproduct in those instances is used to attack employees where a parent doesn't like a teacher, doesn't like an administrator. They want to vet in public about that. And it's a less formalized process. Sometimes they'll just show up at a meeting and say, I want to talk about this. And typically the board president will say, no, this is not an appropriate forum to attack employees. And employees in school districts fall into a variety of categories. In Iowa City, you have certified staff, which are basically administrators and teachers and a few other folks. There's a whole chapter of the code that deals with how they're terminated and basically underlies the disciplinary process. You have there's 4 or 5 other unions besides the Education Association for food service workers, physical plant, clerical workers, sports staff. They have grievance processes built in their master contract. And then there's a group of people kind of fall in the cracks, and Stephanie Van Housen was one of those. And eventually she brought her own Appendix 6 complaint. That's the one you were at, Paul. You heard that was the hearing based on that Appendix 6 complaint. And I'm not confident that airing personnel issues out in a public forum like that is necessarily an appropriate thing to do. And I realize the public wants transparency, but I think those employees have certain privacy rights, and to have the district's put in a position of having to lay out all of their shortcomings in a public forum to justify the termination to the board. That was not a very comfortable proceeding because you basically lay out all the person's weaknesses and shortcomings as an employee and why you don't renew their contract. Part of the problem with Appendix 6 is it doesn't say what a complaint is. It's very general. It says complaints regarding district matters, which can mean anything you want it to mean. From the food in the cafeteria to a teacher and an administrator to the color of school vehicles to the color of the carpet, whatever you want is a district matter. Now, the board has discretion not to take up a complaint. But by that point, it's been put in writing. It's a public record, so a lot of what happens is already laid out there. So I think there needs to be a process for certain things to rise to the level of the board. I also think the board is a policy-making body. It's not a personnel manager. It's not intended to micromanage the details of the district. It's to set policy and then tell the administrators and other staff, put this policy into form and make it work. So I haven't been asked to and haven't prepared any alternatives. One thing I would say, kind of parallel to this, in the policies, not the legally mandated policies, I guess the administrative directives, and we talked about this last time, what's a policy and what's a directive and what's all that nomenclature mean. There's a process for those staff that fall into the cracks and don't have a union contract, don't have Chapter 279 to pursue grievances and complaints about their personnel situation. The problem is that, one, there's a big typographical mistake in it, and two, it says there's a form they can use to do that with and no form exists. So I think that, kind of a sidelight to this, there needs to be something put in to give every staff member a process to take their complaints up the management tree, their supervisor, to the principal, to the superintendent, and maybe to the board. I don't think that Appendix 6 is a particularly good way to deal with employment issues. And so I think you need to think conceptually of what do you want the scope of Appendix 6 to be? What do you want people in the community to be able to bring to the board through this process? It contemplates the first step is the school official or employee, the next is their supervisor, the next is the superintendent, and then they can present a complaint to the board, and the board can determine whether to hear it all, and then whether to hear it on paper or have an in-person hearing. Not necessarily a bad procedure, but I think we need to have some definition of what the scope of it is. What do you really want to have come up through that Appendix 6 process versus coming up through other processes that are already in place? So that's my take on Appendix 6. And I have to agree with Director Hemingway. What is this an appendix to? There's these appendices, but appendix usually means attached to something else. And there's a whole, you have administrative guidelines, legally mandated policies, ends policies, and then you have these appendixes, which are really attached to nothing.
It's probably like the organ. It's vestigial.
Okay. I thought of that way.
Yeah. No, I know. We had this conversation before too, just about all the policies. There's no coherence. There's no coherent structure. It's just superintendent directives and ends policies and appendix, and there's not.
I kind of look at it as the community member coming to a cold, trying to find things in those is a nightmare.
It's hard.
Even after now having had 5 years experience with it. And Steve said last time, all of he's been, he still finds things he didn't know were there because you have, give examples of 600 series policies. There are 600 series policies in the administrative guidelines and in the legally mandated policies. The ones we're looking at are the legally mandated policies. So these two parallel sets, and so if I'm looking to see something about a student or staff, I have to look both places because there's no one coherent place to look and say, okay, policies with students are all in here. The policies with staff are all here. Now, they're in two completely different places. And some are legally mandated policies. And the administrative guidelines, I'm not quite sure what kind of animal those are. I guess I'd call them board policy because they're approved by the board.
I think we have more of that discussion later in our agenda today about maybe the way we want to go with our policies and.
I know I'm a little bit of a broken record on this, but I think in terms of governance, I feel fairly strongly that there's so much going on. This is like a big enterprise, 13,000 students and 3,000 employees, and the more understandable you can make every process and the easier it is, the less mistakes that are made and things happen more quickly. I think it's good governance.
I mean, I think, you point a couple things is supposedly there's a because I've always worried too, because I was a certified employee and I knew that process. It's spelled really well for teachers and everybody through a grievance process. And then that's kind of, so then you refer to this process under administrative directives. That's refers to a form that doesn't exist, so it feels like we definitely have a gap there. We need, there should be a way, some mechanism that's clear and easy to understand. I mean, I know when we're gonna, we'll see how everything shakes out with bargaining, but if we go to that system, getting kind of a handbook for everybody, what role then do the at-will employees play? And is that even a true term, that people are truly at-will, can be fired for any reason with no redress? Because I've always wondered about that, like what about principals and central administration staff? Like what's their protection from, make sure things are fair?
Well, principals and administrators are covered by Section 279. So they basically have a similar but not identical process to what teachers have. And I'll tell you, the collective bargaining agreements I've seen in school districts everywhere are sometimes difficult to administer because they can be ambiguous and have conflicting provisions. And it's, I'm not sure who authored some of those, but some of the language is deficient. And I think in terms of not to get too far off topic, I think the handbook is a good idea because I didn't even know about that until last week. But last spring, 2017, I completely rewrote a contract and handbook for the district, and it worked out really, really well because of the two goals were to take out all ambiguity so that people understood clearly what was written, what the procedure was, and to separate things into a handbook and into the contract. And one of the things that has bothered me since the day I started looking at these contracts is they start out with a recognition clause of the bargaining unit, management rights, and then grievance procedure. I move the grievance procedure to the end because I want to think you're going to have, here's the parties to this contract, here's one side's obligation, here's the other side's obligation. You never read that grievance procedure unless something goes wrong and somebody thinks their rights aren't being honored or somebody's not living with their obligations.
So we're just talking about which employees then that kind of fall. So stepping in, what's our category and how many of those employees do we have?
Well, I think there are things involving other staff that don't necessarily the union contract doesn't control because there are processes built in, and it's only when there's been a violation of contract that the grievance procedures must come into place. So I think you need to think bigger in terms of if employees have issues not necessarily covered under Chapter 279, which really doesn't address discipline versus termination. Master contract addresses discipline up to a point. Same thing for the other bargaining units. The contracts address a grievance, but there are things that can occur before you ever get there. They need to be covered so that the employees have a mechanism, because one of the ways to, and it's laudable, it says you want to resolve complaints at the lowest possible level, and that's one thing you can do in well-written procedure, give people a forum to try it and get a problem, what's a kind of problem, before people get locked into positions and kind of assumes a life of its own.
But this Appendix 6 isn't about employees though, right? I mean, this is...
It shouldn't be, but it was.
It became
about that.
But it wasn't brought about by an employee, it was brought about by a community.
Well,
Eventually,
the first was brought forward by an outside body,
Yeah.
Center for Justice. But then Ms. Van Housen filed her own Appendix 6 complaint.
Okay.
That's the one that went to a hearing, was hers. So one, the Center for Justice never went any.
Because I mean, it says in here, it's that are of concern to students, parents, and the public. So was she considering herself a member of the public when she brought this complaint forward?
Well,
Because she was no longer employed, or?
That's a good question. I mean, to a certain extent, people don't give up their rights as a member of the public because they're an employee. They're still a member of the public. And they don't give up their rights as a parent because they're an employee. So I think that And that's another question, is who is this policy intended to be used by? That's sort of one of the fundamental things. Is it to bring employment matters to the board, or is it to bring significant issues concerning the district?
Yeah, because when it says examples of complaints regarding special ed discrimination, harassment, bullying, contracts, negotiations, all that stuff would be,
It's
like you said, you're a public member first, right? So I mean, any of that stuff could be filing a complaint about harassment because in your role as an employee, but it could also just be as a community member, you feel like you're harassed, so.
Well, what that says is there are specific mechanisms for those that
Yes.
supersede Appendix 6.
So I'm wondering, I mean, that paragraph feels
Oh, it
like a
says
way to
those are
scope
taken care of in
this.
different ways. I got you.
I mean, that paragraph feels like a way to scope Appendix 6 if we want to exclude employee complaints or grievances, because if you've got law, federal, state, or a district policy about those sorts of procedures, that takes precedence, and you wouldn't use this complaint process for that. So maybe there's a way to tighten up that paragraph to exclude, if that's the case of the complaint we're worried about, is personnel matters. Exclude that and then fill whatever gaps we might
Right,
have
that's
from a
the-
policy and procedure perspective. That's short term. I mean, I think, so that there might be some specific language we could propose to add to that paragraph there, but then fill in those gaps from a policy perspective, procedures. Those feel like short term things to tighten this up. Then that bigger issue of the two sets of appendices and it's an organ to what or whatever, maybe that feels like a heavy lift. Maybe that's something we would want to talk about as a goal for the next school year, maybe to tackle how to get that stuff in line, but.
But like I said, that's coming up on our.
We have it on
Is it?
tonight.
Oh,
Chat about it.
oh, we do? Okay.
Yeah, and Steve
Sorry.
kind of laid out, when we brought it up last time, he thought, you know, because they did this, from what he said, they did it once before, but they just tried to pull out all the legally legally required ones. So that's another category now. We have that, but it didn't clean up everything else. But he said that was daunting, and it was
It's
a
a
lot of
heavy
work.
lift.
And he sort of threw out a 3-year time frame to do this and clean it up. Which, to me, I think I'm all about doing it well and not rushing and make sure we have something that's going to last.
I remember last time we talked about that. That Association of School Boards has a set of model policies, and if you look at these, a lot of these, by and large, were drawn directly from their policies. Where it says code number such and such, that's right out of the ISB manual. And somebody historically decided they were going to break this into legally mandated versus everything else. You have all these categories which on their website they're underboard policies, but it's not clear what they are. I think people take them to be board policies. And so what we talked about the last meeting is going to one comprehensive set of policies. And Steve had another one, which is, I can't remember what the name was. It's a school administrator's organization.
Oh, school administration.
No,
ISFIS,
it was a
like
finance.
ISFIS.
And that's the one that we belong to?
Yep,
And
yep.
so there's a couple of
And
possibilities.
those are the ones that will update it every year with the new changes to the code. They'll just automatically,
They send us policy boosters
yeah.
of things that are changing and that we need to look at.
So we're a member of that, so we're kind of subscribing to that service almost.
Mhm.
ISB does that too. So
ISB.
there's a couple different sources you can draw from.
Okay.
And I agree, it's
But though, that one we are not,
IASB, we are not,
yeah.
we didn't subscribe to their policies.
To their
and-
policy update, but we're subscribed to this other.
Mhm.
For IASB, you can take a login and get to their policies that are just updated on a regular basis. So ISFIS, is it pushed to us, or can we go out to their
ISFIS
site
is
and
pushed to
look?
us, but we can get there too, and it gives us policy primers, it pretty much mirrors IASB.
I think that one of the, I'm not familiar with ISFIS policies. One of the benefits of ISB is it's a product that's used statewide, and so it has a lot of parallels, and when you talk to administrators from other school districts or look what other districts are doing, you have more apples to apples comparison. But I don't have a strong preference either way. I just think it needs to kind of be made into something rational. And one way to do it is you start with, say, the series on students, and you roll the two together into one comprehensive set of policies. You leave, so you you've got two 600 sets of policies. We're only looking at one tonight, so at some point you roll those into one. And frankly, there's a fair amount of duplication when you look at what's in one versus the other. But it is a somewhat daunting task. But that, I think that's a way to approach it, is to bite it off into those pieces and roll them into one. I don't know what to do with superintendent directions and ends policies and those sorts of things. I confess I'm not a big believer, booster of cover governance model.
I had a conversation with, I'm going to forget her name, but she's on the Des Moines School Board, and she's apparently doing some assignment somewhere to get maybe certified to train people in carver government. She's like, well, tell me about how you guys do carver government in Iowa City. And I don't think anybody really knows how to do carver. I mean, who's the expert? I can't find Nick Johnson. I mean,
Well, the theoretical underpinning is you basically tell the body, here's the goal, here's the boundaries, you do anything in between that,
yeah.
which is ambiguous and not really empowered. Most organizations, they say, here's the goal, here's the powers you have to get there, versus sort of saying, here's the end, here's the boundaries, you figure out how to get there. And I think the district does the best it can in that model, but I think there's some shortcomings. You want to empower people, not. The theory behind it is you do empower them, you don't put restrictions on them, except for those outside boundaries. But I think there's some questions sometimes about what is the appropriate means.
Well, as far as this goes, that paragraph, because it looks like we have a gap with this process that we refer to, and we don't have a form, and so if we tighten that up and have a process and a form so that anybody who falls through the cracks has some way to grieve or some way to complain, and then that would cover, because it says if there is,
Yeah, right.
and we're covered for that. And then I think figuring out what the scope of Appendix 6 is another a different topic or area for discussion.
I think that's a very good immediate solution, is to look at that second paragraph and say, here are the things to exclude from this procedure. And that might be written. It says examples, not limited to. I think it may be possible to expand that a little bit, figure out where there are processes in place and exclude those, and make sure the processes you do have the working tools there. So I guess that's a question of who takes that on in terms of wording that paragraph too.
I would look to your advice for wording.
Well, and I'd be happy to do that. I don't think it takes a lot of work. I think the one thing is talking to some of the administrators, probably particularly Kingsley, because he's on the point of a lot of complaints. He knows what the processes are. If there's something specific that's not in here, he can say, yeah, this needs to be added, just have this process in place. So I think there's some key people.
And Jean probably relevant to HR.
Should be done.
Well, she's probably more.
Kingsley's the intake for most of
Okay.
them, yes.
Yeah.
How about I just meet with Kingsley and Steve together, and then we'll bring it back again the next meeting, if we have anything to update.
Yeah, sounds good. And then Paul, on that paragraph, but then making sure we have this, a form or whatever that we have we have to fill that.
Yeah, I have to go back and look at that. That's in the employee, the administrative guidelines for employees.
Administrative guidelines.
Because when we're going through this and stepping back housing, we're like this, what's the process outside of Appendix 6? And it's there, but it's flawed, and we need to. I mean, we need to think there's anybody else out there, because I think that would cover everybody outside of some sort of contractual statutory protection would be bad policy. And I don't know how, there's probably several dozen, I don't really know how many all the student family advocates are a good example of all of that. All your physical plant people, clerical people, food service, they're all covered. I confess, I don't know enough about who's out there in the nooks and crannies of the district to really know.
So student family advocates, I don't know.
It'd be all of our off-schedule building employees here, technical and supervisory group.
So it's
Quite a bit.
dozen.
For example, somebody like Kim.
3
More.
dozen.
Kim's probably one of those gaps.
Oh, well,
I'm a gap employee.
You're right, yeah, that's true.
She's not in the bargaining
Yep.
unit.
Yeah, confidential.
And
Or Sam's probably.
Sam's, yep. Grants.
and Kingsley is not a certified staff,
Okay.
and he's not in his bargaining unit. So there are people here and there that don't fit into that need that vehicle, so that everybody has a way to pursue an issue if they have one.
That's good. Because this is one of those things that hasn't been an issue except very recently. We haven't had a lot of those types of employees. Pretty much used to be central administration staff. I mean, there's always the confidential secretaries, but student family advocates weren't around. And, you know,
I think the one thing that's always there is the idea that that can be used, right? So while you guys may not have heard those directly, or you may not have gotten to an Appendix 6 process, I think that's one thing we think about at different times. I know it's a little bit aside of what you're talking about, but that avenue always being there is, something that I think just affects your work one way or another, right?
and how often does this come up at all, Appendix 6?
With employees or people in the public?
Overall.
To the board table? Well, I mean, there's been Appendix 6 complaints, but
They don't make it that far.
Yeah, we had most of the ones that I've dealt with on my time on the board have been about transportation.
Okay.
See, transportation has a whole separate legal process that can be used, depending on what the issue is. Busing is their processes for appealing busing, no busing decisions.
Outside of this,
Outside of this, there's a process under, actually it can end up in the State Department of Education.
So that would be one of the excluded items here then, huh?
For the most part, I think it should be, yeah. Usually comes up when a parent thinks their child's entitled to discretionary busing and the district says no, or the district changes policies on busing. And it goes through the district, then it goes through the AEA, and then ultimately can go to the Department of Education, to administrative law judge.
although we might like it. I mean, is that preferable to something that we can handle?
I'm not sure it's preferable because it's by state statute.
So that's the law.
There's certain things in the laws governing the DED that give parents rights. But good conduct is another good example. They right to give good conduct to the Department of Education. So those are the sorts of things I think in terms we need to think about. It says these are examples, but I think that list needs to be as inclusive as possible so that people in the community understand, one, there may be other remedies out there too, this doesn't apply.
I think you could anticipate one of the transfers at some point. Somebody appealing one, all the way up to you guys, or whatever attendance area concern. I think that would be one. See somebody utilizing that avenue for.
So if it doesn't make it to the board, that means at some point they've been satisfied with whatever.
Like that we resolved it on some
Resolved it.
level, but if we deny a request, deny the appeal, Steve denies the appeal after me, then that next step would be to you guys.
And I think to the extent possible, you want to avoid becoming a tribunal. You want to be a policy-making governing body, not a quasi-judicial tribunal kind of decision maker.
Yeah.
Good.
I've been beating that horse enough.
Okay. 600 policies is the next item. So I know, Joe, you looked at these, right, and then Diane, you had one suggestion for changes as well. Let's start with you, Joe.
Well, I sent out a memo, I hopefully Kim distributed that, which kind of lays out, for the most part, I think everything is in pretty good shape. It's mostly some little technical tweaks here and there. I didn't really find anything fundamental. As I made some sort of general comments, and my partner Krista worked on this also, but one of the things I think you need to look at every policy you look at, when you use the word shall, it imposes a duty, and if you don't follow through on that duty, you get into trouble. Sort of the poster child for that in recent years is Clear Creek United School District. They had a student who was going to cross-country practice at Camp Park to be transported by other students, and the district had a written policy prohibiting that, but they weren't enforcing it, and the district was just dead in the water as far as liability, having a policy to say students shall not transport other students to athletic practices, and look the other way when it happened. They knew what was going on and didn't enforce it. They may not even know they had the policy. So I think in looking at policies in general, you think, you see that word shall, you say, okay, that means that's got to be implemented. And if it's not, it's too difficult, then we need to change that to may. I think there's actually a whole chapter, a whole part of the Code of Iowa that deals with statutory interpretation and the distinction between the words may, will, and shall, and the levels of responsibility that attach to those. These aren't state statutes, so technically it doesn't literally apply, but it's very commonly used to apply to things like this too, to administrative rules and to policies that public bodies adopt. So that's just sort of a general comment to keep that in mind. In terms of the actual policies, though, there's very little. I did see there's one, if you look at 602.2, there was a blank which was never filled in. I think that's pulled right out of the ISB policy. It says you're supposed to do this, and it wasn't inserted. Another comment I made, there's in 605.1, it talks about instructional materials. It talks about printed and multimedia, and we live in an age now where I don't know if multimedia covers electronic access or not, but just in terms of that policy, you may want to make it a little more inclusive in terms of materials, no matter what format they appear in, print, electronic, or multimedia. Other than that, though, I think these are probably some of the policies that are least subject to external changes being imposed in terms of the legislature tweaking the laws or court cases or administrative things coming out of the DE. They're fairly general policies in terms of what you do. You get into other areas where there's lots of external forces that impact those, and that's where you need those updates.
So it looks like the changes were made on here, right, in the drafts.
Mm-hmm.
Suggested, with the exception of the one that Diane made.
Yep.
Okay. And so do you want to talk about the one Diane made?
Sure. So this is exactly what Joe was saying before about not being able to find policies. I was looking for this policy this fall. It's not one that's required, so I started in the 600 section of policies that weren't required, and it wasn't there. And then I looked on the table of contents for this.
It wasn't listed.
And it wasn't listed, so I'm thinking we don't have this policy. And then I just happened to look at these when Kim sent out this memo about the meeting. I'm thinking, oh, we've got a senior year plus policy. That's good to know. So this is one that, again, we aren't required to have, but we chose to have apparently a few years ago. The state does require, so all of our high school students can take courses, college courses, maybe at the University of Iowa or Kirkwood or the two common ones here. The state in their senior year plus regulations say that the students have to demonstrate proficiency on the state assessment, Iowa assessments in reading, math, and science in order to be eligible to take those courses. The only exception are CTE courses at the community college. You don't have to demonstrate proficiency to take a CTE course. So the state also says that if you want to, as a school district, your board can say that there are alternative ways to demonstrate proficiency other than the Iowa assessment. So someone once upon a time created this policy and listed several alternative ways to demonstrate proficiency. So my changes kind of start off with, first of all, just putting in that notation about the CTE, because I just want to make sure people are clear about that. Changing it whenever it says 41st percentile, or when it says Iowa assessments, I just thought it'd be safer to say proficiency on the state assessment, because who knows what the state assessment may or may not be. So I changed that wording. Cleaned up a paragraph that seemed redundant to me there. But then when it comes to the measures, I'm really recommending that we eliminate, they had 6 measures, I would eliminate 4 of them and just stick with the 2 that make the most sense. So if they weren't proficient on Iowa assessments, the 2 I'm recommending that we keep are the ones that say, did they meet or exceed the equivalent college placement exam score? So for instance, when they go to Kirkwood Community College, they typically take AccuPlacer or ALEX, and they can determine if a student is ready to take the college level course or if they need a remedial course. If they need a remedial course, we can't pay for that. The college just recommends that they continue on with high school courses. So they're already taking that exam anyway in order to get into the college, so it seems like if they weren't proficient on Iowa assessment, or maybe hadn't taken the test because they were moving from another state, we could say that as long as they met that college placement score, they would be successful in the college course. And then the other one would be if they took an ACT, so college entrance exam, and if they demonstrate proficiency on ACT, to me that should override them not being proficient on an Iowa assessment, or maybe not having taken that test. The ones I didn't feel as comfortable about was a high school course grade of a C or better. That seemed a little...
I can tell you that, I think one of the, because I was involved with kids who were not allowed to take those courses, but they needed that, right? So sometimes they, and I know there are the college level courses, so if you're not proficient, how are you taking this? But that's where we've been stuck, is most of our vocational offerings are college level courses. And then that eliminates a lot of our kids who need it the most.
But they can take vocational offerings. They are eligible, that does not stop them from taking their vocational.
So those requirements don't apply to those?
Yes.
So, we got pushback from the college level foods class. So I don't know if they call that CTE or not, but they're like, so I know from an educator's point of view, this wasn't clear. Because I know I was told, no, they're not proficient, so that eliminated.
You're right on that.
And they definitely didn't bring up the IEP thing, because that was never brought to me as an IEP case manager.
I didn't bring it to the person who asked me this policy.
No, so I'm just saying, I think some of this loosening up was, we had kids who you just know need this hands-on stuff, whether they're ready, and have had kids be very successful in those without being proficient in reading. So they can, whatever they've come up with ways that they can adapt. And now, if we're moving towards, and it feels like we're moving towards just having more vocational offerings that aren't bound by college credit, then that solves that problem. Because these are the kids who aren't, for the most part, they're the kids who just aren't engaged in academics. And so you're just finding anything to keep them in school. Like what's the hook that's gonna bring you here to make this meaningful for you? Because it's not more reading and more math and beating over the head with that. And so that was where, just as a survival mechanism to keep kids in school and to get them things that they felt more applicable to their life. So I can see where some of that came from, some of that loosening up. So that's, and I can, the C, that's pretty subjective.
And we can leave that if that's what you guys.
Well, no, I'm just saying that that's a perspective that was certainly, I would imagine, part of this conversation, and maybe where some of that came from.
The second one, where it talks about degrees of reading power, I don't think we can give that assessment anymore. We don't give a math or science assessment at the high school level. That's a district-wide assessment that we maybe used to give. We don't give the IELTS anymore. We do give the Alpha 21, but again, that would only be a reading score. I don't know, I didn't think that would probably be as applicable as taking like the AccuPlacer. assessment. And then the teacher determination based on the portfolio was a little broad as well, so. And I did send this out to the high school counselors to get some feedback on that as well. And the feedback I got back were the two that we left are pretty critical, and those are ones that we could say C or better, but chances are they aren't going to, if they don't demonstrate proficiency on the AccuPlacer, the college won't let them take the course. You know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's up to the college. I mean, I think some of this is a result of most of our vocational program being replaced with these college courses, right? Because I know a lot of kids who weren't proficient were like, we had food cooking classes full, and then it was all of a sudden like, and there's nothing more for you because, sorry, you didn't test score. And so that.
And I wonder if that was a change in the senior year, if that came out since then, but it's pretty clear in there that it's
Yeah, that's true.
CTE
That
concurrent
first senior year
course.
Plus, yeah, that shouldn't be a limiter too.
It shouldn't have limited that.
Yeah. Whenever this new senior year plus, I think is what we're saying when that was passed, I don't know if that was part of their response to that reaction you were getting at that time, because that should be something that prevents them now, but you can definitely relate to the fact that if we're not communicating that clearly, I'm sure that's complicated for kids to navigate because they hear that answer on this course and then we know that that's a different answer for these CTE courses over here.
Right.
And that is why I wanted to make sure we added that to the policy that you, so that is.
Can we just spell out the acronyms?
CTE for career and technical education. Probably be a good thing to do.
And then maybe some ideas, not that it has to go here, but I guess if I'm a special ed teacher, what's the alternative measure?
That was one that, you know, to be honest, I left that there because I just felt like we maybe should, but I had a couple counselors question that exactly.
I mean,
what is the alternate measure?
I mean, I know it's hard to say because it is social subjective, but it's the same thing with a kid who's eligible for academics who's not an IEP. Are they making progress on their goal? And, you know, I was supposed for reading progress, but behavior progress is a little more subjective. And so it's that crux of you have a policy, but then you also have a situation where you have this kid and you know they need X, Y, Z, or they probably going to drop out. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it feels like we want a little...
Well, it would have to be, though, in one of the areas of the state assessment. So it couldn't be a behavior goal.
Okay.
That they're making, it would
Right,
have
yeah,
to be
right.
a math or something.
I was just saying
Yeah.
that piece of it. That right, you're right. Because is there an alternative measure? I mean, does that even exist, or is that just up to the IEP team, for example?
This would leave it open to be up to the IEP team, but we could take that off. That's not necessary to have on there.
I like it.
Okay.
Yes, because I've been in that position where you're not going to have a policy that's going to fit every situation, and that's why I really want to trust those IEP teams to make the best decision for that kid and make it as individual as possible. And those are going to be the real specific situations where, for whatever reason, that team knows this or has a feeling this is something that's going to really work for this kid and they can be successful in, even though they haven't been successful in the general academics, you know. So I like it, but I just think to help. So, and I'm fine with leaving it subjective and open, because that, frankly, you really tighten this up a lot, I think. And so to leave some space for those kids, for those teams to have some discretion.
So Kim, the one change then in that one, just we just spell out, or the...
Acronyms.
Yeah, well, just CTE, I think is the only one, because the other ones are covered in the first paragraph.
I haven't seen your redrafts. I'm kind of flying by. I have 3 comments. One, should the alternative measures be moved to the administrative guidelines? That's just, if they're not legally mandated.
This whole policy isn't legally mandated.
Oh, okay. Then why is it?
Why is it here? I don't know.
I mean, that's the sort of conundrum you get into.
I went on other districts' websites to try to find with their policy in this, and most districts don't have one. They just go with the proficiency on Iowa assessments.
A couple of, I missed in here, it still refers to No Child Left Behind. I don't know if you took that out or not. That That should be removed, and then
Yep, I
it
did, I
says
took out that
proficient in each of the 3 areas determined by the IA.
I took that off, I took that to state assessment.
Or that's I is the Iowa assessment, but we don't know
Yeah,
what that's going to be.
yeah.
Oh, sure.
Okay, okay, then.
I'm guessing they put this in there exactly so we could include some kids who weren't proficient on it.
Precisely, right?
Because then we're
Right.
leaving out our minority kids and our marginalized populations. And it's-
You know, and I don't want it to be, you take one test in October, that day, and all of a sudden you can't take
Right.
any senior year plus courses, but I feel like this gives them another opportunity by demonstrating
Mhm.
on those other tests.
And don't they, if they take those courses, do they have to take an AccuPlacer or a Compass or something before they even sign up?
For the college, for the community college, they do.
Okay.
Iowa does not make them take the ACT
Oh,
to
okay.
sign up for
Okay.
PSEO, but they do have to have a 3.5 GPA.
So they're.
Yeah.
Any changes or anything that you guys disagree with what Joe changed in the other 600s? Are those okay?
And just, I think a couple of things. One is, you understand that I look at it just from basically the language standpoint and some obvious things. I don't try and second guess people who know far more about these sorts of things in terms of the nuts and bolts of how things work. I think this is much better, but in general also I think simpler policies are better. If you cut out things that were a good idea at one point but don't really carry over now. But I think that's great to pare that down. One of the other things is it would be helpful to, when there are revisions like that, to see those in addition to what the prior looked like, see what other people are thinking about the same things. I think to get those to me would be really helpful. Because it really is more of a team effort to bring these things up to date instead of people working in their own little silos.
And then are we okay with the senior year plus with just making the one change? So at the next board meeting, if we asked to put these on the next board meeting to take a look at, would be okay with that? Okay. All right. We will move on. Joe, you are free to go.
I
Unless you
don't
hang
think
around.
I'm here for any of the other items, so thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Joe.
Unless you need me.
Thanks, Dan.
No? Thank you. All right, Appendix 2. So actually, Janet, since I wasn't at that meeting and you had made some changes in here, Steve, you guys have made some changes.
we were trying to sort of get the evaluation process better synced up with the contract renewal timeframe and goal setting for the year. The way this appendix was written before, we had sort of the summative assessment in February, which was mid-year, which was kind of a weird timing. It's not aligned with what ISD recommends in terms of the superintendent evaluation process, so I don't know where he got in. I don't think, I'm talking to Steve, he's not aware how it got in this way, but it's really not in sync with any kind of evaluation calendar. And so I think the suggestion was just simply to move some of the work that had been in February up to the June timeframe, where we update progress on the superintendent's goals. We formally evaluate the superintendent. We do a closed session. We present the findings to the superintendent, sign it, put this file, and then we go through the rest of that stuff stays the same. We do the contract work and set goals for the next year. Then we have kind of that October check-in, and that's not changing. February would be another check-in, how are we doing? And so that's the suggested change, is to kind of get this back into more normal cadence of evaluation, goal setting, contract renewals.
Matches the school year.
Yeah.
I think it looks good as long as we follow it.
Well, I think this gives us a better chance to follow it because and in June, hopefully we're not February is
It's quite, it'll be even worse with the November election going forward. You'll have new board members who haven't had a chance to work with the
New board members
superintendent. And all of a sudden, in February, you have to do an evaluation. It just doesn't make any sense.
It didn't
We're
make
struggling
sense
with
to do it
September.
this
Yeah,
February. Like, oh, I've been here since September, and
right.
So,
I agree.
yeah, I think this is.
When I was elected in the summer, I think the first thing I got was a superintendent
Evaluation.
evaluation. I
Yeah,
was
it's like.
Contract renewal,
Yeah.
boom.
Yeah. So, this looks good to everyone, is another thing that I can add to the.
Yeah, and that's,
So so next Tuesday, we'll be asking to add these items to 27th agenda, correct? Got it, okay.
and that was, I mean, we had a pretty robust discussion about all that, I would say.
This one, yeah, the whole board was there, and I think this one feels pretty solid, yeah.
Okay.
No surprises.
All right, moving on. Okay, so in the past meetings, we had talked a little bit about 3 readings discussion. So I reached out to Patty Fields, since she was on the board for what, 8?
She was?
I think 10 or
12.
12.
10?
I think it was longer than
It was longer than
that.
that?
Yeah,
3 terms?
That's her.
she's one of the longer.
She is one of the ones.
Mhm.
Yeah, and she was the president of the,
IASB.
yeah.
Right.
So I asked her the historic background on this, and I'll just let you know what she said. The historical policy and practice was to have 3 readings for board policies. This was to allow for edits after committee presentation, provide enough time for public and staff feedback, and not to rush policy decisions. This was for any new policy and any changes, past grammatical edits, and reviewed policies. In times of turmoil and disagreement, one can always look policy to guide actions, decisions without emotional interference. There was always a first reading, a second and third can be collapsed at the discretion of the board if there was no significant changes in the second reading, and if the board decided there was enough consensus to collapse the readings. The action was first to vote to collapse the vote, and then vote on the policy. There were plenty of times that we had all 3 readings because it was an important policy up for consideration, and the best practice was to follow the process all the way through. This was the standard board procedure for my first 6 years on the boards. Changes in procedure / practice changed as board members changed and newer members felt the process was too cumbersome and or wanted to push things through faster. And board leadership at the time did not honor past board practice. Frankly, it was a time of out with the old. My philosophy as a board member is that I have great respect for policy and procedure as a best practice for continually making and decision making. If followed, is inclusive and allows for fairness and openness, and that is important for policy decisions. So one thing that I think she brings up that we discussed a lot was that I think it came up a lot this past election cycle was the 3 readings, and it's for policy changes. I think sometimes people think that it was for anything that the board decided on.
Yeah, right, that's right.
And so I just wanted to clear that up, and I don't think there was ever a decision or like a formal decision to go away from this, so if we just wanted to start doing that again, I'm okay with that, or
So this is then my question, what's board policy? So 3 readings on this superintendent evaluation, that's board policy. But the votes we take, have we had any policy votes?
Well, I'm just saying the feedback that I've gotten from the public, again, I wasn't the one that was, bringing this part of it up, but the ag decision, why wasn't there 3 readings on that? Why wasn't there 3 readings on changing the facility master plan acceleration?
So
Yeah.
for me, the problem that I see here is less around a solution of 3 readings or other. For me, it's the consistent process that we follow when we're voting and making decisions to set policy or to, I'll say, command district resource. And so for me, if 3 readings is the approach that we feel as a board is the best way to achieve a consistent, fair, reliable, repeatable process that we follow, that our community can expect us to follow, then I'm all for it. If we don't feel like it needs to be 3 readings, that it needs to be some other mechanism, I'm all for it. For me, just speaking very candidly, I don't like showing up at a board meeting and having a presentation item immediately turn into an action item, and as a board, we haven't had a chance to have this conversation previously. I think I shared some of those remarks in an email to you guys, the board, after the last meeting. It didn't feel like we were following a standard process, setting expectations amongst ourselves and with our community members about how we were going to be acting as a board that night. And that makes me uncomfortable. So I honestly care, this sounds bad, but I almost care less about what the outcome of the vote is, as long as we have demonstrated our adherence to our defined process, and we hold to it clearly, meeting expectations, and once we get to the vote, however the votes fall, I'm fine with it as long as we follow a clear, transparent process getting to that
And see,
point.
what I've seen is I don't think we have that clear process, because what I saw happen is exactly what I've seen happen a bunch of times.
Yeah.
On the Kirkwood busing issue, or you name it, like, you name the issue that's been changed.
I didn't like that one either, because I wasn't ready to vote on that. I mean.
No, I mean.
Oh, way back
previous
when,
boards.
sorry.
To me, that's like standard operating procedure.
So let's,
You know, that like, and I'm not okay with it.
I mean.
But it is what it feels like. Acceleration was another one. Like, whoa. And you know, admin was like, now. If we were 3 readings, we might just now be getting to that.
Well, and
But I
I
don't think
felt.
it's a policy though, so I guess that's where, I mean, when this was brought up, it was only on policy.
So to me, that's very narrow. I mean, I don't really think we vote on policies much.
Right, but that's the only time this was used in
Yeah.
my time coming to board meetings.
Because
That was the only time.
Yeah, because it is hard when you're at the board table. Now, I didn't feel that way about this, because it was listed action size.
No, it wasn't. It was changed. It was initially this is a presentation, because it was a motion made at the board table and seconded. You had to, on the fly, change it to an
Okay.
action item.
So you guys could vote.
I prepare for these meetings, and I go through, I have my notes about what we're voting on, what's a presentation discussion. This was a presentation item. It was not set up to be a vote that night. And that's the kind of surprise
Mhm.
I don't like having at the board table when our audience and community members are watching and here in the room. I feel that we need to have a strong, reliable process. On the acceleration one, I'm with you. It came up initially as kind of a surprise, but we
Just
did
plug it in.
choose to have a work session.
Mhm.
It was open,
No, with
community
your
members came, we
extension,
talked
plug into
about it.
that.
We actually sat as a board and discussed different options, and kind of felt like, well, you know, what if we go all in, and if that doesn't work, what's our plan B? And we ended up voting for plan B, which is fine, and we had a good conversation. We at least had an opportunity to have a public work session on the topic. And so for me, those kinds of, I don't mean necessarily SBRC approvals or other kinds of just kind of administrative votes that we take to keep the, you know, voting on consent item or whatever, those things we can move forward on. But meaty topics that set policy or command the use of resource, I think we need to have some kind of process that we agree to as a board that we follow consistently and publish and make sure that people in our community understand how we're going to govern. Because right now, I don't think they know how we're going to govern, and it's frustrating for us, it's frustrating for them, and it causes all this noise after votes, and it's dumb. I mean, if we just followed a good process, you know, it's like winning or losing a game. As long as you had good rules and clean officiating, at the end of the day, you shake hands and you move on to the next topic.
Mhm.
But right now, we don't have clean rules and always clear officiating.
I mean, I think Paul's right. If we go to 3 readings on things like that, that's new. I mean, I don't know that the board's ever done 3 readings on.
FMP acceleration or
Right.
new
So-
programming.
But, so in my mind, I'm like, what's going to be the most effective use of our time? Is it work session? Because the FMP was good, right? We had a big work session, but then that was a lot of time. Or is it 3 readings where you have a reading, you vote, because you know, like, community isn't necessarily going to pay attention to a work session. They'll pay attention to a vote. Because that seems to be how, oh my God, what did you just do? Even if you've been, well, we've been doing this for years. It's like, what did you just do? And it generates that kind of response. So is that better to then get the random emails or the conversations in the supermarket or however we get that input, and then go to 2nd and 3rd reading and maybe have a better sense if we can collapse those and move on, or we need to keep drawing it out? Or do we have a work session every time?
I mean,
And what's the threshold for a work session?
we said in one of our retreats that we wanted to make use of work sessions as much as we can, because we like that kind of informal, a little bit more informal conversation around the room. Again, I'm not prescriptive on the solution for this. My only strong desire is that we have a consistent process and we follow it very, in a very disciplined way. Let me put it that way. If it's 3 readings, great. If it's for a substantive vote, we have to have a discussion at the board table, agree to have a work session, hold the work session so the community knows we're doing it, have the debate. In that work session, we can decide, are we ready to vote at the next board meeting, or do we need another work session? Because it's so, you know, meaty that we need to have more community input. I think as we gauge our way through it, we can decide when we're ready to go to a vote with confidence that our questions have been answered and we've gone through the material in a way that we feel good about voting one way or another on a topic. I think I prefer that let's have a discussion at a board table on a topic and decide next, in an agenda setting, set a work session, have the work session, see how it goes, and then choose to take it to a vote or choose an additional work session. I mean, I think I prefer that approach.
I think it's more thorough. I'm trying to just be
I mean, the
mindful.
3 readings feels a little overly formal to me, but,
Okay.
that's just, I'm new, so.
But like if we would have followed that process that you described, just using the agricultural one as an example, so it was listed as a presentation, so if we would have had a discussion and said, hey, let's
Take it to a work
take it
session.
to a work session and then, maybe a vote at the next meeting,
Yeah.
that would have given.
And we could have said, oh, I'd like to understand, there's some budget trade-offs, give Steve and team an assignment to bring some of that data. What's the implementation plan look like, so that the next work session we had some more information to kind of, understand how this was going to be rolled out. And those are my questions anyway, that we didn't get a chance to answer at that board discussion.
What does that mean? I mean, because you guys do the work, and I think all of this slows things down. And I think I'm really, really comfortable with that. I'm really comfortable because, again, if it takes 2 years rather than a year, if it's a good process, I feel better about that moving forward. But you guys are doing the work.
I think hearing from Janet that it wasn't an action item that night and it got quickly turned into one. First of all, I'm thinking about how we post the agenda, right? And so since it said it wasn't an action item, should we be able to stop that conversation right there because it wasn't listed that way? That was one thought.
Yeah, and that's my learning is in my role for the rest of this president thing. I'm not going to allow that to happen here. I will call it, because I don't think it's right. It's not proper preparation to ourselves or our community, so.
The other thing I think on our side, if we know we're bringing something important and new to the board, maybe we should be pushing the work session idea for it. That's one thing we can help with. The other piece of me was thinking, well, do you just need a policy to say, however it's listed on the agenda is what we will be doing that night, but then do you want to hold yourself to it if it seemed like it was super important and you could feel that you had the agreement, just move it to the action item? So I don't know that that's the route to go either. Those are just thoughts I have.
Yeah, I think the known is the biggest thing for us, like know what you want or what that is. We can operate in those frameworks then as long as we know, is it just a presentation? Do you want a recommendation for action?
So then
Yeah.
So let's say it's a so at what point do we decide something's an action item before it gets put on the agenda? Is that just a conversation with you and Lauren and Steve?
Well, it would be based on, if we had a work session, it would be based on the recommendation
Well,
of the
yeah,
work session.
but
We
what
think
about
this is
stuff
ready
that-
for a vote.
Comes up that we didn't have a work session on, like that.
Well, that was a presentation item,
Mhm.
and so that's how I was going into the meeting, that this was not to be voted on. It was listed as presentation. I thought it was going to be an update from the committee, and here are the options. I thought we were going to talk about pros and cons of the options, and then decide what to do next. And so that, for me, is the route for bringing things forward as an action item is, first have a presentation, discuss it, what's the impact, do we do more work? And I'm kind of with you. I don't know that I really want a policy prohibiting us from changing presentation to action if
Everybody agree.
if it becomes very obvious, this is, strong agreement, it's, admin's aligned and the board's aligned, we should be able to move forward and not drag something out. So I'm kind of not wanting to be overly prescriptive there, but, so I think that's how things get onto the agenda as action items, is we agree we're ready to have an action item on something of substance.
I was thinking about reading through the norms and how in most circumstances you would love to see whatever 7-0 vote.
Yeah.
And so how do you know or get that feel? And that's, to me, happens through a work session. Because it's hard for you to know that.
It's hard at the board table. I just don't. It's a hard place to do work, real work. It's pro forma. We do that. It has impact, but it's not like a real good discussion. This is a real good. I think we've had a number of really good discussions around these tables.
Right, and I think some of that, just kind of switching back to the part about actual policy and the readings, I think being on policy and governance, and maybe Kim can chime in here, but I'm like, sometimes we hammer through these things and then we like go back and we like go back and we go back before we even bring it to the board. You know, we've kind of done
Vetted it,
here,
yeah.
where we've done that. And I think that's some of the time when we got up to that point. You know, if you were on the board, maybe you weren't sitting in those policy and governance meetings, and you just trusted that, you know, if it was a revision, that they were doing it right, and if you read it and it looked right to you, that you didn't need to see it two more times.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what I wonder, if, when Patty was doing it, did they do as many work sessions, or were they doing more stuff just at the table? I mean, I don't know. Because these are all, I mean, those are all public meetings. This is a public meeting, posted agenda.
I guess it's very different. Kim's gonna have a better perspective on that, but just as long as I've been here, it seems like every kind of continuum of membership we've had have operated differently.
Well, and
Committees, work
that's why I'm
sessions,
hoping
meetings,
the
all
work
that, yeah.
that we do starts to lay some groundwork, so we have a little more consistency. I hope it leads to just board members being board members longer. I mean, I really think that's the best way to get it. Yeah, but if we can have a good groundwork that, like, nobody knows why we're doing policy and governance. Carver, right? That's lost. Nobody's gonna be like, you know, this is what was going on before, and this is why we're doing it. So now we're all just going,
It's weird, isn't it? I don't like it.
But somebody has a good idea
Yeah.
somewhere.
And I think some of this kind of falls into the next topic as well.
Okay.
Because if you, and maybe I'll just kind of put these two together. Because if you look at like Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, and at least the Des Moines link was there, and the Cedar Rapids one I looked at too. You know, their handbook, their policy handbook goes through and says like, this is how we govern, and this is, you know, what we do. So if this is something that we decide to do, and we put it in a handbook style form, and we say we want to have whatever we decide we want to have, even if we all are not here next time, you hand the book off and you go, here's how it goes, you know, and there's this is the procedure.
Well, and we're going, you know, it's kind of the season of handbooks.
Should have a board handbook.
We should have a board handbook.
Well, that's
That's what these are.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if you looked at it.
So, yeah, I did go through it, and it's, obviously, we'll have to drum out details, but the idea of it, I think, goes right in line with all of the conversation we have about our policies being all over the place. Get it in the board handbook, because that's, I mean, we have, obviously, we're gonna have to have, as a district, there's gonna have to be some, you know, policies that relate to employees, where you can go to the website and look at that might not be in the board handbook. But maybe there's a lot of that stuff we can clump in a board handbook that would cover just this kind of stuff. Because I would prefer a work session, even saying that might end up taking more time, but I do believe it's a better process.
It's a much better process.
I think we'll get a little pushback from lots of community members who, they're going to want 3 readings on everything they don't agree with. Is right?
And it applies to board members too. There are some topics I think should be just, boy, pushed through because they're absolutely the right thing to do, but you might not agree with me.
Right.
And you'll want to slow it down, and vice versa.
Right.
So that's why having a consistent process, clear rules, clean officiating, that's so that we get to the vote, we get to the end of the game, and we can all agree on the outcome because we followed the process.
So that's where I'm saying, I think if we did a 3 readings, I think we'd have a lot of support from that all over the place. Even though I don't think it's the best.
So I
But 3
think
readings on every decision?
No,
or 3 readings
big,
on policy?
like she said, big, frankly, ag, FNP, I mean, this wasn't a big decision, but the open enrollment to Liberty in or out,
Yeah,
that
I
was
didn't like
that was
that.
made at the table.
I didn't like that
would be a
either.
3 reading, in my mind.
Now, that would be something that is time, right, like something like that actually has time.
I just think it's gonna be a bigger conversation for you guys when you start talking about which ones are 3, which ones aren't.
Yeah, and
you
so
know,
that's why I like a little flexibility as we
Right.
kind of try to get into a more defined process. And so there's an idea, so Lori and I are meeting with Steve, I think it's Friday.
Friday morning.
So all of these conversations have led to, okay, we need to understand kind of what's coming from an agenda. And we're going to look at kind of map out what's happening the rest of the year, what are the hot topics, what are the things that we have to do. We know we've got FMP coming, we know we've got more boundary work to do. And so just trying to get out ahead of the work that we know we have in front of us and start laying it out across the various agendas we have between now and June. The other thing is there's an idea on the table that I think is worthy of conversation. We'll start Friday, but I think we need to have a work session around it, and that's to use, the idea is basically use the second Tuesday as a, a robust board meeting like we typically have, with lots of presentations and content, and if there's big votes on the meaty topics, we would do it there. Third Tuesday is Ed Committee, which is a fantastic forum, and actually, frankly, I think that ag discussion should have gone to the Education Committee, perhaps instead of a work session, because it was around curriculum. Anyway, third Tuesdays are Ed Committee out in the school building and whatever topics are relevant. The fourth Tuesday would be kind of a shortened business board meeting, so consent agenda, whatever, matters we have to vote on, just to keep, the board moving forward and the district moving forward. And hopefully the agenda is short enough that we give ourselves ample time for a work session. So we've got a work session that starts at maybe 7:30 or 7 as opposed to 9:30, and we create our agendas in a way that gives us that flexibility for whatever the topic might be. I mean, we're saying right now we want a work session after every board meeting to talk about boundaries. I'm confessing to you guys, when it gets to be 9 o'clock at night, most of those Tuesdays I've been up since 4 and I'm done. I'm tired. I'm not good.
It's not, nobody's going to make their best decision.
And so if we can get into a cadence of organizing our agendas, so we've got one big heavy board meeting a month, and we've got one light from business that allows us the time to do work sessions, and we reserve that third Tuesday for Education Committee, which captures, I think, some of the building level stuff. I don't know. It's just an idea that's being proposed. Steve's talked about it. Lori and I have talked about it, and we're going to have a session on Friday and then bring it forward for a conversation to see what might make sense. But time is definitely a factor. I don't.
Well, sometimes it's like the time you put.
Yeah.
Yes, right, absolutely, and right. Yeah, that sounds really.
So is that something that you want to, after that discussion, talk to the whole board about, or do you think it should come back to this?
I think we added it as a work session item, didn't we?
Group.
For next Tuesday.
Governance policy.
So maybe it needs to be P&G that talks about it. I don't know. I think we added it as a work session item, Kim, for next Tuesday's work session at the very end to talk about this kind of agenda setting idea.
Do that, but then bring it back
Yeah.
here to hammer out
I
some
think
kind
it's
of.
good.
I mean, I think it's going to be. We'll have to figure out how to craft policy around that to get it so it isn't too restrictive, but also allows for that. Because once we establish a practice, again, this is going to be incumbent on the people who stay. You establish them, because some of this feels to me like what a president could just do. To say, this is the way I want to run the show, and as long as the majority of the board or most of the board is on board, you could just run it that way, and it might become a habit. But how do we codify it? Or do we see how it works before we craft a policy? But I think we'll bring it here to
Talk about.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that. Clear?
Clear?
I know where you're going, yeah.
Yeah, I see it. I get the vision. It's good. And then on that, maybe there's days you don't have a work session and you just
That's
get a
right.
shorter meeting. And there's
Because
nothing on.
we don't have any big topics to talk about.
Weird.
That's like, that'll never
basically,
happen.
yeah, but so if that happens, so you're going you said second, third, and fourth Tuesdays, so then the first Tuesday is policy and governance, basically
We're going to have. Well, it's kind of the way it is now. Isn't it? We just P&G every Tuesday.
Yeah, like that third Tuesday is usually not.
Sometimes that third Tuesday is a.
Oh, but don't we have that committee every third? I thought that was
I don't know.
Ed committee's the third, fifth Tuesdays are gold
free.
nugget.
Well, sometimes that committee's been monthly, sometimes it's been quarterly, sometimes it's.
Yeah, it to me sounds like it's been all over the
It
place.
has
And I
been.
don't ever, now I feel like we've had some topics, and there's probably other things, but hopefully we're not going to get to the place where we feel we have to have a meeting to have a meeting.
Agreed, yeah. I mean, you're the chair, and if
Yeah.
there's nothing that we decide we need to do the next third Tuesday, then
I mean, there's a part of me that loves getting out to school and
Yeah.
just giving a chance, but again, to bring an entire ed committee to it, just to see,
I know.
well, especially admin, for the board members, it's kind of nice maybe to get out if you don't, but
It's a lot.
it's a lot. Holding teachers out.
Yeah.
I think teachers probably don't mind if you come to their school.
Especially if they're showing off something.
Yeah, showing off their deal,
Yeah.
and that's a good function of the board, but certainly we don't have to waste your time. You've been to all the schools.
I don't get out to them very often,
Oh,
so
that's-
I like it.
Also, that's good
Yeah.
for you too, right?
So just going back to the policy discussion as well. So if we feel like we want to go towards this handbook thing, I guess that would just be more working with Steve to see on the ones the policies that he has, right? That are,
Mhm.
Say it again, I'm
Split.
sorry.
well, what is it, IS?
Yes, FIS?
IS,
Mhm.
yeah. So they have all the legal and,
Yep,
right?
all of the policies,
All
and
of them.
actually, IASB is the same way. If you would get into theirs, you would see that the policies that they recommend are much more cumbersome than what we have because we've gone to the legally mandated.
Right, so then like everything else that we have that's not legally mandated is what we have to take a look at and see
Mhm.
what we would need to keep or put into that form, right?
I think you'd find that a lot of the guidelines are in the policies that are on IASB. That's kind of why the guidelines, used to be we had policies, then we had board policies, administrative policies, and administrative regulations. So we had 3 sets. So the board policy was what was mandated by the state. Everything else got a little bit meatier as to more detail of,
So my experience has been just my last district, Linmar, which I think, what you mentioned Cedar Rapids tonight is making me wonder, are they under Carver governance? But anyway, so I've heard also Steve describe most school districts, policy manual is big, your administrative guideline binder is small, right? You have very few that maybe relate back to the policy. That was exactly my experience at Linmar. The superintendent there, Katie Mulholland, even though policies had to be reviewed every 5 years, she kind of tasked her cabinet team to go in, and they had certain sections, right? So our team would take the 600 series, the student series, and she would get them done, and then every year, every policy would get looked at. I'm not suggesting that we need to move that way, but it is a nightmare to go into these superintendent directions, appendices, guidelines.
It's really, really
Give me a
hard.
policy manual and admin guideline, if we need one. And going right out to ISPIS or IASB, who's already done the work, it's just
Yeah.
so much simpler. But that's just me, sorry.
It's like a city high or a University of Iowa hospital that's been added on to a bunch of different, or Lincoln.
Yeah.
Shankly added on to just over the years as things came up and you needed it. You really needed it right then, but you can't really see what the whole vision is for the, I mean, I followed kids through City High for 6 years and I still get lost in it.
So the way she worked it was she went through her cabinet, tasked them again, whatever series, had the timeline built for the year, and then they still had a committee like this. So their board members still met, they brought the policy, they talked about the updates that.
Because we're on a 3-year cycle, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so we're well within our boundaries. I mean, we're supposed to be reviewing every 5 years. So this process too works, but it's just one I want to share that we have used.
So, yeah, and I don't want to, I mean, everybody's got a lot of work, so maybe from you folks, if we hear what, I mean, Steve kind of threw out 3 years, you just off the cuff, and so maybe figure out what would pace, and then maybe what we can do is come up with something we like as, if it looks like that Des Moines handbook, or,
Yeah.
and then we can sort of,
I guess the question would be, before we even start that part of the work, do we need to have this discussion
With the whole
of
board.
The whole board, say, hey, this is kind of what we're talking about,
Yeah.
policy and governance. Do you want us to go down this path before we do all that work and then get it back there and like, what is this?
No, I think that's fair.
and so one example that we could throw to the board is when Steve sent me the stuff on nepotism, and it's like 3 different areas. Here's an example of a policy we have that's all over the place, and if you wanted to go find it, you couldn't. So this is why, things like this are why we want to go to this handbook. It's one place, you find it, it's right there, if you have a question. And that, just to show them, because, or we could give everybody a pop quiz and say, okay, go look up blah, blah policy and see how easy that is.
I think another thing that I liked in their handbooks was it worked in, I don't remember what they called it, maybe it was board governance in there, but it cover a lot of things that we just can call norms.
Mm-hmm.
But they're actually written down in there,
that's
and they
good.
have like, here's what they are, your code of conduct.
Mhm.
Here's what they are. If you feel like someone's not doing this is the process.
There's a
that lays
mechanism.
it out.
Mhm.
Yeah, as opposed to like, I think I brought it up at the work session when we talked about, or the retreat when we talked about norms, like if you don't do it, what's the consequence?
There's no
Nothing.
mechanism for enforcement,
Yeah.
for any kind of accountability.
So for us to have norms, but no, it's like,
But they don't have any, in the ones that you were talking about, those handbooks, I mean, are there consequences?
There are,
Yeah.
there's censure.
yeah.
Really?
Mhm.
Wow, I need to go in and look at that.
I mean, it's again, it's not,
'Cause-
it's censure and it's not like you're off the board, but you
It's-
might lose an officer position. There's some
Interesting.
things in there like that.
Uh-huh, that's interesting,
Yeah.
okay.
And it's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's spelled out. I mean, it's pretty thorough.
And I was trying to find it too when Joe was here, but I couldn't find it. I think it was the Cedar Rapids one. When they had, I think they had a complaint process, but they also had a picture matrix kind of laid out like, here's the board is responsible for the superintendent has his or her assistant superintendents, so then it would be like Amy and Steve and all those guys, and then, or Matt, and then under that person, like it just had a line, like, okay, now this is who Matt's responsible for, and this is secondary principals or whoever, so it laid it out in their thing, like
Like a nice
here's,
org chart.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's, kind of nice as well, because I think it's the same type of thing, maybe the public's like, well, who is the board's responsible for? I go to Steve first,
Mhm,
and that's my only link, and then after that, he branches out to the others, so.
Well, we're getting, I mean, that's kind of 3 P&G things we want to put. I mean, this is just take a look at it. This is what we're thinking. We're not asking. Some of the other stuff I think are actions that will be super quick. And
Yeah, well, so when I go to the agenda setting, because I think I set it on there,
Mhm.
the second meeting, we might have some actionable items, so we'll add those. The other one, I think, is just a conversation, so at some point, we either have that at that table here or during one of your work sessions that you.
about the handbook.
I think it's a fantastic idea.
Mhm.
I really do.
Well, and other people do it, and I think, once we remember these things are recorded, that sometimes Iowa City, we couldn't possibly do what anyone does. We can't possibly do what Cedar Rapids does because
We're special.
we're special. But, and maybe there have been times when there was really important, but the truth is, and well, quite frankly, a few years ago, IASB was not a trustworthy organization. They were doing some shady things. There were people that were doing some bad things. So I think there was some distance, like, yeah, we keep them in arm's length a little bit, but everything I've seen out of them has been really, really slick, and we've got enough work to do in this district that we don't need to be reinventing the wheel and coming up with our own special.
Yeah. Completely agree.
So, I'm more than willing to do some more research on it before we present it to the board and talk about it, but that's the way we.
Yeah, we should, we could put it on the P&G update for the 27th. Just
Throw
so
it out
we've got
there,
a
get people
couple
looking at
policy
it, get it
moves
on,
and
get
then
it in
it's
a packet so they can
Yeah, I
take
think
a
that's
peek.
good.
Because it's
My goal is to be done by 7 today, so we're almost there.
we have
Yeah.
anything else?
Well, we need to set the agenda for the next meeting, which will be the first Tuesday in March, right?
And it could be this whole agenda thing. It could be what that policy around,
Well, I got a couple of things that were brought up at the board table that were mentioned, so I'll throw those out there if we decide we want to tackle them. There's actually 3. One was social media and board members, which would be an interesting discussion.
I actually think that's kind of good, but
Yeah.
So that, to me, I don't know, that feels like, I'd like to have some expertise, like somebody who's maybe, who could come in and say, this is what's going on, right? I mean, like a Joe Holland, or maybe even somebody who's a little more, who can say, these are the cases we've seen, this is what's going on.
yeah, or what other policies might other districts have for
Yeah.
social media for
Because it's,
board members?
I've only seen, was it one? But I think it was teacher related. I think I had a conversation with Steve about no, I think I sent it to you. The one district where the teacher got in trouble for
Right. I think, it seems to me we've looked into this too.
Swearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, these are.
Because they
we kinda
can't
need
use
to know what
profanity
they-
on social media, like it's in their
Mhm.
policy book for teachers.
Wow.
I'm thinking more like, are you friends with students or that sort of thing? But that's a sticky, right? If it's your kid or their friends or, you know, it gets.
So that was one thing that if we want to discuss, we can put it on there. Another one was interactions with the media, who should be responsible for that type of thing, if we wanted one person or not. The third one was cell phone use, which I kind of brought up at the table, that we did have that discussion pretty lengthy at last year in P&G, so.
Can you give me some context on cell phone use, what you mean by that?
Students.
Oh, student cell phone use, thank you. I'm still stuck on phone number stuff. Like,
Yeah,
I can't use my
sorry.
cell phone?
No, students use it
Student.
as schools.
I mean,
Oh.
if you have the discussion, and I'm fuzzy on what our policy is, and then I think there's our policy, and then there's what's really happening, and I think those might be different.
Well,
What is
then-
our policy?
I'm not sure I know.
Do we have
Well, we have an
one?
acceptable use policy, and then each building has their own cell phone policy, which we had them bring back and ask that they all kind of clean it up and make them
Uniform.
More
uniform.
consistent,
Yeah.
yeah.
Are they? No?
I haven't seen them
We
since
have
we had that
conversation,
question,
right?
but I think
Mhm.
the discussion that we had was that we have a committee, technology
Mhm.
usage committee,
Mhm.
and they hadn't met for the year when we were
Right.
having this discussion. So that committee should have met, right, since then? Because I'm pretty sure that was back in like May or June, and then there was like August, because we were talking about the rollout of one-to-one
The
computers.
one-to-one.
Yeah.
Adam has
I think Adam
various
was working
committees,
on that,
but I
yeah.
don't know if they met.
So what's
Have
the,
those met?
I mean, I know what happened when I was a teacher.
I mean, we can discuss it at the next meeting.
Yeah, you're right,
I
yeah.
don't go into it right now, it's
Sure.
not being on the agenda.
I just don't want to have stuff on the agenda if it's been covered and we actually don't need to talk about it.
I mean, we discussed it, and I can go back and recall the date if you want to listen to it, and I know the
I can
exact
find that.
point it was at.
Well, maybe put it on the agenda and we'll,
Just listen to the discussion, and if you want to rehash it
okay.
again.
And I guess I'd just love to know what's happening right now and where we're at with.
And is it feeling like a problem because we don't have the proper policy, or?
I think some people feel like it's a problem. From my personal experience and what I've talked with people, I don't know that it's a problem that we need to tackle. I think
'Cause,
building
I mean,
by
I'd
building
like
has
to
done a fairly good job of doing that.
I mean, because what's coming up from the buildings, I mean, I feel like teachers, principals would have a view on if it's working or not working, or there needs to be a change, or, I don't know, what,
I imagine it depends on the teacher you talk to.
I think.
I find cell phones to be extremely problematic myself and absolutely unuseful.
And I guess I just went to Sherry School Day on last Thursday at Southeast, and they seem to be pretty acceptable there, and they use them, so.
Okay.
Yeah, it's probably a lot of times when you get into the kids misusing it and the teacher wants to take it and then you have the argument.
I see.
Which I also witnessed at that day, so.
You didn't see you're not taking this phone, you don't pay that bill.
I did.
Oh, they did?
Okay, other than that, we'll probably have to bring back, hopefully I will have met and talked about Appendix 6. We can come back and talk about that again. Other than that, 600s, unless they get brought back again to us again, which I doubt. But if they do, that would be a placeholder, I guess. And then, do you have the list up for what we still need to cover?
Let me look. Whoops, wrong one.
First Tuesday in March, right, the 6th.
Shoot, I thought I had it attached, I
Oh,
know.
yeah, I'm not on the committee, so I don't know how that
Well, hopefully Ruthina is feeling well then.
No, I kind of enjoy these conversations, I might,
This is
You can come and sit in those
I can come and sit on
chairs
those
right over there
chairs
and
and
watch.
just listen?
Yep.
I don't get to contribute or participate though, so, but still, I mean, these are interesting conversations.
I'm not putting my hands on it. I thought I had it attached.
Did I
to
send you, JP, from Nicholas Johnson, the board governance theory and practice? Okay. Because he talks about Carver governance a little bit and then talks about it in our school district and when it came about.
Oh no, yeah, I'd love to see. Is it an op-ed?
It's just, it's from
His blog.
yeah, my web, wiowa.edu, Johnson/governance.
Okay.
And if you would like to read it as well, I can send it
Please,
to you.
yeah, why not? Thank you.
Because I knew
Okay.
he had written something, but I hadn't read it. Somebody said, "Oh, he's written it. He hasn't put it up."
We have 100 years later. Sorry.
Yeah, 1999.
Oh, he wrote it in '99.
No, that's when Carver.
That's when they adopted
When
it,
the board
yeah.
adopted it.
We did
Man,
the.
we're pushing 20 years. Maybe it's time to change things up. It's
Yep.
just
The other
so
thing we need to get to, Paul, is
Or
board
How
governance.
we're doing it, or how we're
What?
supposed to do it.
Did we do all those?
Which one?
So board governance levels 2A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. And the other thing are the superintendent directions, level 2H, I, and J. I think we did do those. So, yeah, we did the INS policies and we're on legally mandated, and the appendices are 2, 3, and 6. So I think we've got.
Just check. Board governance, like style, governing, election of officers, all that stuff. It's not, if we did, it's not updated on the website.
So I bet we haven't. So board governance 2A through H.
Why don't we wait on that one, and
Okay.
then I'll add that later, if we just, that would be a
Okay.
good discussion about Carver governance,
Okay.
actually, so. So we'll just put the ones on there that I had. that was
Appendix
today.
6, 600 series.
Yep. Just in the and then we'll do, we'll have to define these, but social media, cell phone, we'll have a holder for that,
Okay.
and interactions with the media from the board.
Okay.
We can define this a little bit better. All right, I take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.